Self-esteem and self-concept. Self-esteem is the global evaluation of oneself. Some people will call this self-worth or self-image. The self-concept is domain-specific self-evaluations. So, for example, you could say, I'm a good football player. That is going to be that's part of your self-concept. That's a very domain-specific self-evaluation. Self-esteem is more of a global thing. I feel good about myself in general, and it's not necessarily tied to one trait or aspect of my identity. But that being said, children can make self-evaluations in many different domains and kind of like add those all up for self-esteem. So it could be academic, athletic, physical appearance, and so on. The foundations for self-esteem and self-concept emerge from the quality of the parent-child interactions in infancy and in early childhood. Basically, children with high self-esteem are more likely to be securely attached to their parents, and their parents engage in what's called sensitive caregiving. One of the things the book talks about is having a clear and consistent self-concept and self-esteem is key to a healthy development. You want to have good self-esteem. That being said, self-perceptions do not always match reality. High self-esteem, it may refer to a justified perceptions to one's worth, successes, and accomplishments. So let's say you have high self-esteem, you do great in school, you do great in sports, you have lots of friends, you're popular, you would have high self-esteem, and that self-esteem very possibly could be justified. However, self-esteem can also, and this gets the way the book phrases this is going to sound a little harsh, but just stick with me for a second. Self-esteem can also refer to an unwarranted sense of superiority. Low self-esteem may actually reflect an accurate perception of one's shortcomings. So it's kind of sad to think of it like that. Now, it could also, if you have low self-esteem, that could actually be a distortion. So you could have a distortion, like a pathological insecurity and inferiority. But some people have low self-esteem because maybe they're not doing so great in some of these, places we've talked about. Maybe they don't have a lot of friends. Maybe they don't do well in school. Maybe they don't do well in sports. They don't have things that they're good at. And that could lead to a low self-esteem. And it's like a signal. When you feel low self-esteem, you don't want to just try to mask it. It's like sometimes medications, they just mask the symptoms. They don't actually fix the underlying issue. So if you have low self-esteem, you don't want to just cover it up with a sense of false self-esteem. You don't want to just be like, oh no, I'm great after all. I don't need to worry about all these things. That low self-esteem is like a warning flag. It's saying there's something wrong that maybe you should try to address. There was a time period, and I might post a short, brief lecture and some articles on this, the idea of, they had the self-esteem movement in the late 80s, 90s in that area, where they just thought, okay, if we raise everybody's self-esteem, their grades will go up, their peer interactions will go up, everything will be great. All we have to do is raise their self-esteem, make them feel great about themselves and tell them how great they are. And nothing they do is wrong. Participation trophies. This is another example. Just because you participated, you're great and you're awesome, here's the trophy. Well, it turned out that backfired. It didn't actually lead to better scores, didn't lead to better academics, didn't lead to better anything. All it did was it raised it's almost like a false sense of high self-esteem. And this is an insecure type of self-esteem. And what it did was kind of create people that were just a little bit narcissistic and that they thought that they were great, even though that it was unwarranted. They weren't actually great in any of these domains that we've talked about, but their teachers and the parents were telling them that they were always great. Because it was an unstable self-esteem, whenever they were challenged, they would lash out in anger because they didn't understand why people would think that they weren't great. And where you would see this happen is that, kids would go through, middle school, high school, be told how great they were, participation trophies and all that, and then they would go to college, and things wouldn't work out like that. And they wouldn't understand because everybody had told them that they were always great. And so it actually did them a huge disservice. What you don't want to do is raise a false sense of high self-esteem in a kid. What you want to try to do is raise self-efficacy. You want to try to get them good at something. If you can get them good at something, then you can, it's a natural rise in self-esteem. So if you can get them good at school or athletics or whatever it is, if you can get them good at something, that will raise self-esteem. And that's going to be a lot more helpful than just telling them that they're great at everything and giving them participation trophies and all that. They do have a couple of different ways of doing assessment for self-esteem. Susan Harter's self-perception profile for children. This is for kids that are in 3rd through 6th grade. It looks at general self-worth plus self-concept for school competence, athletics, social competence, and physical appearance. and finally, behavioral conduct. Another one is the self-perception profile for adolescents. It assesses global self-worth. So it uses those 5 domains that we tested for children and 3 additional domains: close friendship, romantic appeal, and job competence. Harder's measures show that children have both a general level of self-esteem and varying levels of self-conceptions in particular domains. So they might be good at sports, but maybe not so good at school. Now, this one is interesting. Self-esteem appears to be especially strongly tied with one area of self-perception in one domain in particular, and it is physical appearance. So the link between perceived physical appearance and self-esteem has been made in many countries, and it is not confined to adolescents. In figure 3, it goes through some of these correlations. So physical appearance, very high, much higher than all the rest of them. And so that's really interesting that physical appearance, to a certain degree, there's not a lot you can do about that, especially, in middle childhood, late childhood. That's something that you're born with. Some of these other things you can work on, like, your behavior, your school, your athletics, at least you can work on those things. At least some aspects of the physical appearance, though, you're not going to be able to do a whole lot about. On developmental changes in self-esteem, there's researchers, they disagree about this, and obviously a lot of other things that we've talked about in this textbook. They do disagree on the extent to which self-esteem varies with age. One large meta-analysis showed it increased across childhood, was stable in early adolescence, and then increased in late adolescence and into early adulthood. In most age periods, the self-esteem of males is higher than the self-esteem of females. And one of the possible explanations for this is a negative body image, and it kind of goes back to that idea, self-esteem being tied with physical appearance. And so yes, figure 4 shows that figure form, if you would like to look at that. On variations in self-esteem, studies of youth around the globe show that there's a moderate correlation between school performance and self-esteem. Now, that does not necessarily mean that high self-esteem is going to make for better school performance. Perhaps you do better at school and then your self-esteem goes up. So it could be either way. It's a correlation. It's not experimental. And this also kind of goes back to that idea, what I was talking about with where they did the self-esteem movement. And they're like, well, if we raise self-esteem, it'll raise academic performance. And it just did not work out like that. Because it's quite possible, again, the self-efficacy. If you raise the school performance, then the self-esteem will go up. That's the angle that you would probably prefer to take at it. Children with high self-esteem show greater initiative, which can be positive or negative. So that means they may be more likely to engage in both pro-social and antisocial actions, the kids with high self-esteem. So they're actually more likely to protect another kid from being bullied, but on the other side, they're also more likely to bully other kids. So yes, when you say they show greater initiative, there's positives and there's negatives to that. Researchers have also found pretty strong links between self-esteem and happiness. So high self-esteem increases happiness. Low self-esteem, you're probably going to be more depressed. And also, if you have low self-esteem as an adolescent, you're probably going to have low self-esteem at the age of 30. There is some cross-cultural research that suggests that self-esteem is closely tied to doing well in activities that one's cultural group believes to be important. And the cultures definitely differ in the importance placed on self-esteem. So, some things to think about. On the next set of slides, we're going to talk some more about identity.